24th Sunday in Ordinary Time.
A reading from the book of Sirach. Wrath and anger are hateful things, yet the sinner hugs them tight. The vengeful will suffer the Lord's vengeance, for he remembers their sins in detail. Forgive your neighbor's injustice. Then, when you pray, your own sins will be forgiven. Could anyone nourish anger against another and expect healing from the Lord? Could anyone refuse mercy to another like himself? Can he seek pardon for his own sins? If one who is but flesh cherishes wrath, who will forgive his sins? Remember your last days. Set enmity aside. Remember death and decay, and cease from sin. Think of the commandments. Hate not your neighbor. Remember the Most High's covenant, and overlook faults. The word of the Lord.
A reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Romans. Brothers and sisters, none of us lives for oneself, and no one dies for oneself. For if we live for the Lord, and if we die for the Lord. So then, whether we live or die, we are the Lord's. For this is why Christ died and came to life, that he might be Lord of both the dead and the living. The word of the Lord.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Peter approached Jesus and asked him, "Lord, if my brother sins against me, how often must I forgive? As many as 7 times?" Jesus answered, "I say to you, not 7 times, but 77 times. That is why the kingdom of heaven may be likened to a king who decided to settle accounts with his servants. When he began the accounting, a debtor was brought before him who owed him a huge amount. Since he had no way of paying it back, his master ordered him to be sold, along with his wife, his children, and all his property, in payment of the debt. At that, the servant fell down, did him homage, and said, 'Be patient with me, and I will pay you back in full.' Moved with compassion, the master of that servant let him go and forgave him the loan. When that servant had left, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him a much smaller amount. He seized him and started to choke him, demanding, 'Pay back what you owe.' Falling to his knees, his fellow servant begged him, 'Be patient with me, and I will pay you back.' But he refused. Instead, he had the fellow servant put in prison until he paid back the debt. Now when his fellow servants saw what had happened, they were deeply disturbed and went to their master and reported the whole affair. His master summoned him and said to him, 'You wicked servant, I forgave you your entire debt because you begged me to. Should you not have had pity on your fellow servant, as I had pity on you?' Then in anger, his master handed him over to the torturers until he should pay back the whole debt. So will my heavenly Father do to you, unless each of you forgives your brother from your heart." The Gospel of the Lord.
Reflection. 24th Sunday is about forgiving our offenders and getting reconciled with them. All the 3 readings today remind us and challenge us to continue on the path of forgiveness, mercy, and reconciliation. Today's psalm speaks beautifully about God's forgiving love. God is kind and merciful, slow to anger, and rich in compassion. Since healing is the outward sign of inner forgiveness, restored health means restored relationship with God. The Gospel specially emphasizes two ideas. The first idea in Jesus' reply to Peter's question is that the disciples of Jesus must forgive one another always, without limit. The second idea found in the parable is the communal dimension of forgiveness. Today, Matthew's Gospel invites us to ponder over the mystery of forgiveness by proposing a parallelism between God's ways and our own human behavior when it comes to forgiving others. Man even dares measuring and keeping control of the magnanimity of his forgiving nature. Lord, how many times must I forgive the offenses of my brother or sister? 7 times? Peter felt 7 times was a bit too much, perhaps the very maximum we can stand. In fact, Peter comes out of it quite splendidly if compared to the official of the parable, who, when he met one of his companions who owed him 100 pieces of silver, grabbed him by the neck and almost strangled him, shouting, "Pay me what you owe," refusing to listen to his pleading and promises of payment. In fact, man either refuses to forgive or miserly measures out his forgivenesses. Who would actually say that we have just received from God an infinitely reiterated and limitless forgiveness? The parable says the king took pity on him and not only set him free but even cancelled his debt, and this despite the fact his debt was very big. But the parable we are commenting on emphasizes God's way when it comes to granting forgiveness. After calling the debtor's attention to the gravity of his situation, he suddenly took pity on him before his humble and sorrowful pleading. He threw himself at the feet of the king and said, "Give me time, I will pay you back everything." The king took pity. This episode reflects what each one of us knows by our own experience with a deep gratitude that God forgives the repentant and converted one without any limit. The negative and sad ending of the parable, however, honors justice and evidences of truth of Jesus' words. In Luke chapter 6 verse 38, we read, "For the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Forgive and forget and get reconciled." In the light of eternity and the shortness of our span of life, harboring old grudges is pointless. Neighbors who remained hostile and unforgiving till their death remain buried a short distance from one another in the same cemetery. Our ability to forgive is the measure of the depth of our Christianity. The forgiveness that we offer others is the indispensable condition which makes it possible for us to receive God's forgiveness and to meaningfully pray, "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us." Let us remember St. Francis Assisi's prayer, "It is in pardoning that we are pardoned." Our failure to offer pardon means that we have forgotten God's goodness or have not fully appreciated the unconditional forgiveness we have received from Him.